An excerpt from Prokofiev's Concerto No. 3. You listen to Castaway's Choice. Our Castaway is writer, director Joe Oliansky. Would you say that classical music and jazz are your two great loves?
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of territory. I had a difficult time on The Competition, which is a film about young pianists, and most of the music young pianists play is from the 19th century Romantic repertoire. I don't like the 19th century Romantic repertoire. I'm not simpatico with it. I dislike the idiom.
You were able to indulge one of your great loves in The Competition, and the other great love, jazz. Yeah. You were able to pay homage to in your screenplay for Bird.
Yeah, a very peculiar situation. Bird followed The Competition in the writing, and that means I wrote it in the year 1981 and part of 82. I was fortunate enough to meet the Queen of England. We had a royal premiere of The Competition, and I went from there to Paris and to where Chan Parker lives in Champmathieu, which is near Fontainebleau. And I said, I know everybody says this, but I really am going to make a film about Charlie Parker, because I thought I was. And we enlisted her. We brought her to California. We put her on tape, and I, from her story and from Red Rodney's story, I put together a screenplay that I was going to direct, hopefully, whereupon nothing whatsoever happened for 4 years. And then one day I got a call from somebody saying, do you know your screenplay for Bird has been traded to Warner Brothers? I said, for what? And they told me. But it took me a year to find out who had caused this trade to happen, although I guessed before the year was up, because there's not that many jazz clubs in Los Angeles, and I had run into Clint Eastwood in some of them, and I knew he was a jazz fan, because he didn't just go to clubs to hear Spyro Gyra. I mean, he was there to hear somebody interesting that maybe nobody had ever heard of. And so I thought, well, if I can't be the one that makes his picture, I'm glad it's him, because I can't think of anybody else who'd be better. And fortunately or unfortunately, that's what happened. I wrote a piece called Masada in 1971, and it was finally done in 1981. I wrote Bird in 82, and it was finally done in 88. And so it sort of makes you... and I wrote a piece on Adam Clayton Powell 11 years ago that apparently might be my next project to direct. So I get worried about what I'm writing at the moment. That means I have to wait 10 years before this sees the light of day. I hope not.
Is this typical in the industry?
Not as it's typical that a certain amount of time passes. Now, The Competition was exactly the opposite. A slot existed that needed to be filled. Richard Dreyfuss wanted to make a movie with Amy Irving. Ray Stark wanted to make a picture about young people in classical music. All of those things fit together. I started writing the screenplay on February 20th, 1979. We started shooting the picture on February 20th, 1980. That never happens. I mean, that was just one of those things. But normally, yes, there is a certain amount of waiting. I hope I'm not typical.
You've chosen Bach's Chorale Prelude No. 47.
Actually, the first time I heard this or was conscious of it was through jazz. I heard a jazz version of it by the Swingle Singers on their Bach album, and it caused me to pursue it elsewhere and in other versions. I've come to think that it's if the Mozart doesn't do it, or if Michelangelo's four-figure Deposition in Florence isn't it, that this may be the single greatest achievement of mankind. It's the thing you can hold up and say, this is why we shouldn't be destroyed, and maybe this is why we are better than the animals. And it also is an arrangement. The central composition is not by Bach, and so once again, like Nelson Riddle and William Walton, he proves himself not only a great genius, but a wonderful arranger.
An excerpt from Bach's Chorale, Prelude number 47. You listen to Castaway's Choice. Our Castaway is writer-director Joel Oliansky. Joel, when you are all alone on this deserted tropical island, is there anyone or anything you'd be happy to be away from?
Yeah, rock and roll. Rock and roll in the largest generic sense. I hold a very unpopular view. I don't think rock and roll is a symptom. I think it is the disease. I think it's what has caused a lot of spurious thinking and artificial euphoria and a lot of half-baked stuff. And I'd be happy to get away from it. I think it's pretty much what's wrong with all of us.
And if you're allowed a person from history to drop in and visit you?
Yes, well, I've heard other people say strange things, answers to that question. I've heard people say Lincoln, Shakespeare. These people have obviously spent no time whatsoever on a desert island. And so if I had the choice, my choice would be Barbara Eden in a raspberry-colored knit jersey dress. Lincoln is all well and good, but it gets hot on that desert island. I'm sure he'd just as soon not be there either.
And if you're allowed a luxury item, something that you might miss from everyday life?
Well, halava, which is my downfall. I might learn to get sick of it, which would stand me in good stead if I ever got rescued. Although I might weigh 800 pounds by the time I got rescued.
Well, you're going to have an unlimited supply. How about that?
That's what I was afraid of.
Are you a perfectionist?
No, I'm far too lazy to be a perfectionist. My taste is developed to the point where I don't like my work very much, but I'm too lazy to do much about it. And I'm bored by perfectionists elsewhere. I'm a Gene Kelly person as opposed to a Fred Astaire person. I don't think you can have great art without the element of risk. And Gene Kelly always looked like he was about to fall down, about to lose his balance. And Fred and Ginger were sort of every hair in place and were perfect. And I guess they were wonderful, but after a while I used to think, who cares? So that's what perfectionism kind of bores me.
How about being a romantic?
No, I don't like romantics. I'm a sentimentalist. I cry very easily. I cry at meat market openings, but I don't really think... I like to think that my emotions don't guide logic, and I think that's the problem with romantics.
And if you're allowed a book, excluding Shakespeare and a religious book?
Well, I could cheat and say I'd take the Oxford Companion to English Literature. That would give me everything, but I won't do that. In the spirit of the question, I would not pick any book that I loved because I'd get tired of it. I would pick a book that I would never have a chance of reading back in civilization, that I'd like to have read. But no, I'd never get around to either Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks or George Eliot's Middlemarch or any one of those three-syllable titles like that.
You're going to leave us with Jerry Mulligan, Young Blood.
Yeah, played by Stan Kenton. And another piggyback. This gives me Lee Konitz's wonderful alto solo and Maynard Ferguson and Connie Condoli. I've always said that jazz, the great thing about jazz, and the reason I hate to see it portrayed in movies as guys playing ballads in smoky nightclubs with their hearts broken, is that jazz is the best thing about jazz is the triumphant, transcendent music that rises above circumstances almost contemptuously and says, the hell with all this, I can play like this and I can produce these emotions, and what difference the circumstances make. And here's a band, Stan Kenton's band. I love the sound of a big band. I'm a sort of a groupie of a band called Maiden Voyage, all women, led by Ann Patterson. I love that sound. And here's a band, maybe the best band Kenton ever had. They're